Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on Edge and the changes coming with Broadcom and VMware. Today with me is our CEO, Bryan Smith. Bryan, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, AJ.
I appreciate you joining. We wanted to talk about Edge and remote locations and how this change from Broadcom coming down affects those end locations. And I think to start, let's kind of talk through the changes that have actually happened with Broadcom and the changes that they're making to the VMware licensing. So what changes are we seeing there, and what are clients actually getting now?
Sure. The biggest change is really in both packaging and how the go-to-market works for VMware. So on the packaging side, VMware used to have over 4,000 different individual SKUs that were packaged into 100 different bundles. And they've really reduced that down to less than 5 individual bundles. And for a service provider, it's really one bundle with a handful of add-ons that they can tie together. And the goal of this is to have a package that has all the different technologies available so that a client can choose what they're using, but really have one integrated system where they can make one decision of using a service provider, not using a service provider, and having access to that unified stack. And then the second piece really is how they're selling that. So in enterprise, they also had to make those same decisions on what different VMware services they were buying, but it was generally buying a perpetual license with an annual maintenance fees that go with that. And they're switching everything to a subscription basis where you're doing a 3-year or 5-year subscription for licensing.
And I think, how does that really play into Edge? Because Edge is not necessarily designed the same way that you would design things inside of a data center, right? You don't have big, heavy cores inside of a single socket. You're trying to build kind of as bare bones as possible. So how does that licensing model change the way that you would look at an Edge location?
Yeah, for Edge specifically, there's a couple different components that have an impact. One is, do you want redundancy or not? And this is something people struggle with for Edge. So do they have a single server? Do they have multiple servers? And with the licensing change, it has a minimum of 16 cores. So if you have a single Edge host, then it's a minimum of 16 cores, no matter if it has 8 in it or not. And then if you're doing redundant servers, that same thing would apply. So it starts to become an exponential multiplying effect when you think of those Edge locations, trying to minimize compute, decide if they want redundancy or not, that the licensing aspect for VMware becomes a larger total cost compared to the percent that it was previously.
And even then, I think the other part is when you're designing for Edge, you're trying to keep that as bare bones as possible. I'm just trying to run some VMs at this Edge location, like a manufacturing or retail location, where it's not necessary to have all of the additional bells and whistles that you would have in a data center around automation or software-defined networking or software-defined storage. So how much is that playing into a cost increase on the Edge side?
Are you really, though? Because I would completely challenge everything you just said there.
Okay.
Because if you want to have internal storage in a device, you're not having 3-tier storage. So having that software-defined storage makes a lot of sense. Do you want to manage every individual site independently, or would you benefit being able to manage from an entire fleet where you roll out one set of updates, you have one set of networking, you have one set of patching, you have one set of security that goes everywhere, and you have those all tied together, running it really as a fleet versus, I think the way that most people have run their environments is lots of individual locations. And that's one of the challenges that they've had in managing that. And it's the last frontier for cloud because they've tried to get to a cloud operating model for the rest of their business, but they've still left Edge just as its own thing sitting out there.
And does that sort of fit into the way that businesses look at that total cost of ownership too? Of like, okay, it's some hosts that I run out there and I'm trying to keep the licensing as low as possible, but they're not necessarily considering all of the other components and people time that go along with that.
I think that anytime there's change, obviously there's a lot of emotion that's involved in this because there's a price change that's happening, there's a packaging change happening. So it's forcing you to make decisions at a time frame that you may not have been ready to. So you can think about it as an opportunity as well. Do you step back and say, what is the ideal type of environment that I should have? And if I'm going to make changes, can I make changes that give me better uptime, that give me better management, that give me better visibility and better operations? And you can decide if it's going to remain on a VMware environment or it should be an alternate environment as well.
So how do those alternate hypervisors sort of play into that discussion? Because kind of in that emotional state, You're saying, well, I don't want to, they're taking my old licensing away. They're giving me this new thing that has a lot more in it, but it's also way more than I want to pay at this remote location or in this sort of remote fleet. How does an alternate hypervisor sort of play into that scenario?
Well, it's going to depend on how it's consumed as well. If it's sold per core, it's going to be very similar. So then you have to look about the ecosystem. Does your alternate hypervisor support the backup technology, the networking technology, the observability platforms natively that you already have, or is it self-contained? Because those are different options that are out there. But it's also a situation where a service provider often has different licensing than what's available to an enterprise. So for example, Expedient, we have the ability to do edge computing and do our Expedient Edge pod and actually do licensing per virtual machine on that. So it can be a significant reduction versus if you were doing multiple different cores. And especially then you can have the decision to have redundancy versus not having redundancy, and it really doesn't have a change in cost to you because you're paying by the individual machine. Because that's one of the big differences on edge versus normal central computing is your utilization on the hardware is generally much lower than what you'd have in a central production environment.
Right, because you're running 5 to 8 VMs, but you still need to have 2 physical hosts for redundancy. So you're not filling it to 80 or 90%. You're running it at 40 or 50% and trying to keep, to optimize the hardware for that solution. Do we see clients seeing a huge shift when they look at their edge workloads of, I want to maybe take, put a little bit more on the internet egress from those locations, and maybe I do pull it back to a central location? Or do we still see clients saying, no, I definitely still need to keep this at this edge location, and how do I optimize the costs going forward from there?
Sure. The people that we work with edge generally always have to have it there, because there are environments that if the network connectivity goes down, they need to keep have the ability to continue operating their business. So you think of manufacturing, you think of healthcare, you think of retail, all those type of environments that if the technology isn't available, they're just out of business until it comes back online. So those type of workloads, I think, are target for edge. For things that are just running at a remote location because that's just what they did, but it wasn't actually dependent on that specific location and having the computing there, those are things that they should look at moving into a central type of environment.
And so what sort of options do we sort of offer for clients in that space? We've had our existing edge platform, which we actually have here, sliding into frame, where it's one very small box, but we can run dozens of workloads off of this. We even have clients who run multiples of these at a single site for manufacturing purposes. So how does that fit into the overall ecosystem and hypervisor decision? Do we have to change that hardware or no?
We're able to use the exact same hardware. So our edge pod that we deploy can actually do over 100 virtual machines on it, or could run containers on it. And it's a blade environment where everything's hyper-converged. And the hardware was originally designed for the military. So it's ruggedized hardware that can deal with lots of different temperature environments, vibration, types of dust. So it was really important when we selected this. It's actually something that's certified both for VMware and Nutanix, so that we had optionality going into the design for either one. And depending on what your load is on there and what your utilization is on the host may drive your decision on which hypervisor you're using. So for example, if you're high utilization, then it's really of what technology platform you prefer. Is it VMware versus Nutanix? Because there's not going to be a massive difference on cost if you're at high utilization. If you're really low utilization, Nutanix is going to be probably a preferred option because Expedient's able to do a per virtual machine type of billing model.
And I think this is where our experience comes into play of we help you not just provide some hardware and some licensing, and it's up to you to figure this all out. It's also on us to help you figure out what is the best option and help you optimize those costs. And I think that's the key difference between trying to figure this all out yourself and having somebody like Expedient, where we've optimized our costs inside of our data centers, where we've been able to pass on an average of a 5% change in VMware licensing costs for our multi-tenant environments, and really keep those costs down for clients because we've optimized our workloads all the way forward. So, do we see that optimization also playing forward into the edge environments where we help figure out what is that best option?
Absolutely. One of the core beliefs inside of Expedient is if we give clients and prospects easy access to high quality data, they can make better decisions overall. So, a couple of things that we have related to Edge is we have tooling that can ingest your current environment, understand what's there, and then we've written software that is an edge sizer that will go site by site and tell us, what's the amount of hardware that should be there. And then we can look at the hypervisor side to make suggestions from there. So, for example, somebody that was using Edge previously on VMware, and if they said the change in cost was too much for them, we could move that over to Nutanix, and they're not going to have a difference in cost there. And depending on what they're looking at go forward, there may be other options for deployment, but we look to optimize everything in the stack at the edge to the central data center. And beyond just that cost side, a lot of the value is the curation of the different technologies into one solution. Because we have a lot of conversations with clients about you can make lots of different decisions in your environment because it's kind of like where'd you buy your last car?
I bought it at a car dealership.
Okay, and not at AutoZone or Advanced Auto Parts.
No, it turns out they don't have those.
They do.
It's not in the. I mean, do they have them?
You just have to put it together yourself.
Oh.
And that's how most IT is driven, that you made lots of different decisions of which backup platform, which operating system, which hardware, which SAN, and those are different decisions that then have impact all the way through, versus when you're looking at as a service provider, you're making that one decision on essentially availability. You're purchasing uptime and availability. And then all the other pieces are around that service level agreement that the provider has to do. So when changes happen inside like a VMware or other technology platforms, we make the adjustments and continue to provide the service to you.
And I think that's a key thing that we've heard from a lot of our clients is they didn't have to go figure this all out. We figured it out. We have had literally a dozen people working on how do we optimize, what is the impact, what are the changes we need to make, how do we make sure that our clients don't see a huge cost impact, and that includes our edge platform. And I think the key difference of building it all yourself and doing it all yourself versus leveraging that service provider is the ability to get decision-making at scale, where you don't have to focus on all of these individual components. Like, I don't really care that the muffler is this particular brand or that particular brand. I care that it's on the car and that it's doing what it's supposed to do as part of the car. So do we see, our clients making certain decisions, and kind of what are those decision points that they're getting to when they're looking at these edge platforms? Is it, the technology stack? Is it just based on raw emotion and I don't want to go with this company that just changed my licensing costs, or is it something else that this is now sort of being the accelerant on top of?
I think it's more the accelerant because I think you have the raw emotion, especially if you're talking about the VMware Broadcom changes specifically, because they have the biggest impact on an edge environment. Because if you have a redundant and a primary server, you're paying for at least 32 cores at a minimum, even if you may have only been using the effectively of 8 or less. So there's a significant, not just a cost increase, but also from the number of cores that you're being billed for. So you get that initial reaction of, I want to understand what other alternatives are, and then you need to kind of follow that chain of decision down to say, well, what's the impact? Do my people know how to run something alternate? Does this have to reside on premises? What's the lifespan of my current hardware? So there's lots of things that you start to factor into the decision process. But what's interesting, a lot of the edge things, the running of the system is a different decision than the owning and refreshing hardware. Those are often different groups inside edge computing. So you do also have an option to unify these together to that single source that is doing all future upgrades, all the future changes on one unified platform.
And I think that really comes back to what we've heard from our clients is the decision makers at the top are concerned about cost. They're concerned about the financial impact versus the people who are the admins, the engineers who are worried more about like, okay, well, we can switch to this alternate platform, but I'm gonna have to go relearn everything. I think that plays into it. And I think that's a key differentiator where we can come in and help facilitate that, where they don't have to instantly learn it all at once. We already know it. So here's how we can help you get to where you want to go faster and assist along the way when you need help. As part of the Broadcom changes, there's also been changes to our partnership, right? And I know that they, they eliminated the original VMware programs. They brought in new Broadcom programs. So where does Expedient fit into the new Broadcom partner ecosystem?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the biggest changes in the partner go-to-market. So previously, VMware had over 4,500 service providers, so cloud service providers around the globe. And with the change, that's been drastically reduced. And Expedient is one of 12 pinnacle-level service providers in the U.S. So, we're companies that are certified on the platforms that we've been doing it for well over a decade. We know how to utilize the technologies well. So the client knows what the experience they're going to have, and also that Pinnacle group is also a team that's able to go to market with VMware sales teams, so that a end user could work with our existing sales team, look at different options, understand what it looks like in the VMware ecosystem, and getting that consistent experience across different providers.
And I think that becomes very interesting when we talk through, go to market, where clients can bring their own licensing, their own ELA licensing. And if their ELA isn't up for another 2 years, they could come onto our Edge platform with that exact same licensing, where they get the benefits, but they don't have to take any sort of increased cost. They can continue to leverage their existing investments. How does that overall fit in when we start talking about to Edge, to centralized data center, to DR? How does that Pinnacle partnership sort of play into that?
I think that it's all about that getting a client's environment to that cloud operating model. And so your points are really good about that transition, because they can leverage, as a Pinnacle partner, they can leverage their existing ELA, run it on our hardware, running at their premises. And then as that expires, we're able to leverage our licensing and put it onto that. And as a Pinnacle partner, we also have the ability to adjust licensing along the way, so that we could have a certain amount of licensing that's committed. But then also, for example, if they were doing things at disaster recovery or doing things in the core data center, we can scale and grow those over time and do consumption-based licensing as needed.
And I think that's really where the flexibility comes in, because the best pricing that you can get as an individual client is going to be if you do a 3-year commit, which means you need to know what you're going to be in 3 years. You need to know where you're going to be, and anything that you go above and beyond that is going to be a much higher cost. I think this is where working with a service provider really comes in and allows you that flexibility that previously you wouldn't have had with the existing VMware licensing, or going forward, the ability to kind of grow and shrink and get to that cloud operating model they're looking for. How does Edge kind of play into that cloud operating model, though, from a licensing standpoint?
Sure. I want to go back to something you said, that that you said that the best pricing they get is if they do a 3-year commit. The best pricing an end user gets is if they do a 5-year commit and prepay for 5 years.
Ooh.
And so the difference of working with a service provider as a Pinnacle provider, or Pinnacle tier, we have the highest discount percentage of any service provider. So we're passing that on to the clients. So we have a lower cost for operations that gets passed on to the client as well. But then it's all monthly billing with the service provider, versus if they want that maximum discount, they would have to do prepayment. So I think that's an important clarification.
That's very, very important to say, hey, you don't have to put the entire amount out up front. We're able to provide that commitment level pricing, but without the actual, huge long-term commitment to this particular number. You can sort of grow into it. And I think that's where, again, that model comes down to Edge. When we provide that at the Edge, it's the same concept. It's the same sort of commitment level.
Yeah, and the clients, it's the same experience, honestly, that if they're getting our enterprise cloud in our data center or out at the Edge, it's really the same service. And depending on what their needs are, we're going to help make decisions on which hypervisor it should be, so we can give them options that's completely consumption-based. We can do options that have a commitment level that we're licensing the entire cores that are available. So we do have those options as a service provider by having also different options from hypervisors along the way. And we could have it different at the Edge than what you may have at your central core production environments.
And I think that's the sort of flexibility that we're able to provide and really bring it together as a whole solution, versus this is the thing I do at a remote site, this is the thing I do in my data center. The Edge team is different from the data center team, and trying to navigate and balance all of those changes at a CIO or director level is really hard, because there's so many different decision points. I think working with an Expedient is where they can really gain a ton of efficiency of just, hey, let them figure it out. This is what they do. Right? We've worked with food service companies. We work with retail companies. It's that their job is to sell stuff. Their job is to make food. Our job is technology. And I think that curation of the technology stacks and of the way that you can consume those is huge for organizations that want to take advantage of that scale. When we start to dive into that from a support standpoint as well, we've talked about how there's the main big Cloud Foundation bundle. Is there another bundle that clients potentially have access to, but how does that fit into their overall, sort of if they wanted to run things at a remote location?
Sure. That VMware has a second bundle that's available that's designed more for the SMB, small business type of environment called VVF. So the big differences between the VCF that we would be leveraging in VVF are, one, it wouldn't support any type of automation that you may have done in VRA. You wouldn't have the software-defined networking with NSX. And probably one of the biggest for people, especially at edge locations, is you don't have 24/7 support for those on a day-to-day type of operation. So there may be instances that you're figuring pieces out, or that you're waiting till the next business day, which doesn't really always work for those type of environments.
Yeah, and especially something like retail, where they're doing the majority of their business on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If you have a problem on Saturday and you can't get help until Monday, that's a big deal. And I think then it increases the cost because you're making a decision based on a support contract or a support timeline. Mm-hmm. And is that value proposition worth it? Whereas leveraging Expedient, we're able to bring that in. We're available 24/7 to be able to help you with your problems, especially on something like a Saturday for a retail organization, and get back up and running without this huge jump in cost.
Absolutely. When I think of what is Expedient and the core value, you mentioned the word curation before. It's really the curation of all the technologies together, and we're simplifying the initial implementation, but also the day two operations and delivering a business outcome. That's the service you're buying from Expedient. So you're not worrying, is this a VMware issue? Is this an HPE issue? Is this whatever technology? It's really that we're responsible to deliver 100% availability. So you're buying the quantity of resources with a certain availability, and we take care of all the other pieces in between.
Yeah, and I think that sort of finger pointing, I think people who have been in those sorts of support calls where, VMware saying it's not our problem, it's a hardware problem, and the hardware vendor saying it's not our problem, it's a VMware problem. You get that lovely finger pointing. It's on us to figure out where the problem actually is, right, and tracking it all the way down and leveraging our expertise to actually go do that. I think that is another key point to really where that value lies of we can help get through and cut through the noise to actually get to both the solution to a business problem, but also the solution to technical issues when they happen. So for our Edge platform, where can clients learn more? Can they come to us? Can they set up a meeting? How do we keep going there?
Yeah, the easiest is definitely having a conversation, because we can give you easy access to the tooling to assess your current environment, run it through our Edge Sizer and give you options so you can understand based on where you're at on your enterprise agreement with VMware, where you're at on your hardware lifecycle, all these different components, and we can make it easy to set up a meeting and have a deep conversation.
Well, Bryan, I appreciate your time. We're going to go now to live Q&A, where you can ask your questions and get them answered by me or Bryan, and we'll see you then. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us for the live Q&A portion here. With me is Anthony Jackman, who's our VP of Strategy and Innovation. Anthony, thank you for joining me.
Great to be here.
I want to go through, we got some questions in the registration that we're going to go through. If you have any questions, please enter them, and we'll try to get them answered as best we can. I want to start with one that came in with, how does this compare to Dell's VxRail and other on-premises hyper-converged infrastructure? And I think this is a fairly common question that we get when we talk with clients about Edge. What are the kind of key comparisons there?
Really, we're quite comparable from a hardware perspective. VxRail is a management layer on top of the VMware stack with vSAN to try to make it a little bit easier to administer. Our difference is, we don't really require that extra layer of software because we have an entire team that is built to operate this platform. And from a client perspective that's consuming our service, it's something that they don't even have to think about because we are taking on that day-to-day management of the platform itself, keeping the lights on, doing break fix on it. So, from a hardware standpoint, fairly comparable. I would say that we are a much more consumable, high-touch service.
Got it. And it's effectively you're trading that software management layer for a people management layer.
Correct.
So this kind of plays into it is how does this actually help me support existing workloads on my aging hardware? How does that sort of play in there?
So this is where the magic button of our service delivery team comes in.
Yes.
We are experts at migration. We've done many very, very large scale migrations. And when it comes to edge sites, it can become even more difficult because often these locations don't have much staff that has the time or even sometimes the skill set to migrate to a new platform. Our delivery team are experts at this, and we have a lot of experience doing it with Expedient Edge, including live migrations. So we have some clients that operate workloads that they deem absolutely critical to their business. They don't want them going down for 1 minute. It costs them money. Sure, they could plan an outage if they needed to, but our view was if we can keep them running 24/7, that's what we prefer to do. And we have done that in production. So we've landed new edge gear at a client site, networked it in with their existing system, and then planned a live migration of workloads onto the new platform, effectively transitioning them to an as-a-service model, live, no downtime, very low touch from their own team.
And I think that's, from an aging hardware standpoint, this is a great opportunity to say, hey, I don't want to manage hardware anymore. I just want to take advantage of a service and a team that can actually help through that. And I think that's really the value proposition is less about, it's not a thing that manages existing hardware. It's a hardware service that actually replaces that hardware and allows you to get better equipment in the door, but also not have to deal with a huge CapEx upfront as well.
Absolutely. And also not having to deal with a replacement schedule, especially our clients that have more sites. They start the project to replace them.
Yes.
And, they start with the first one. And by the time they get to the last one, it's time to refresh the first one again because it can be quite burdensome for them. We can knock out all those sites very quickly.
And also not add on to the workload that they have, because the other problem there is that they're in that cycle from first site to last site and then right back to the first one. It's also all of the other things that are pulling them in 8 different directions while they're trying to do all those upgrades. So we can kind of dedicate that workforce towards that. There's a question here about what pricing advantages does Expedient have relative to someone purchasing their own licensing? And I think the big one there, as Bryan mentioned, was that we can sign a longer term agreement but pass the savings on to you, right? We have the ability to, as an overall purchase from our cores, we're doing it for everyone, for all of our clients. And so we're able to do that and allow you to get effectively a month-to-month model without having to sign on to a long-term contract to get that pricing down. The other piece there is for things like disaster recovery, where you don't pay for disaster recovery licensing until the actual disaster occurs and you've declared one. So that is something that clients in an existing model can't do. We, as the pinnacle providers in the service provider space, we can do that, but our clients cannot. So that's another sort of cost savings benefit with utilizing Expedient as a pinnacle partner to get that pricing advantage. There are some, what do you also see from a pricing advantage standpoint?
I mean, that you hit on one of the big ones, which is the ability to peel back one giant lump sum payment of 36 or even 60 months, which is what's required for maximum level discount, and being able to pull that back to a true month-to-month schedule. Also, because we have a couple hypervisor options, we can optimize our licensing and our choice of hypervisor to the client's unique workload. So if they have a very small workload, we have a platform where we can license it per VM with Nutanix if that's a fit. Some of the more dense workloads, it becomes what's the right platform choice based on that client's unique needs. And
right.
We can help to make those decisions.
And it's not necessary, but then we have a utilization. We're actually having a conversation about what's the best way to do this and not just here's what's cheapest.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are always watching our clients' workloads, not only for performance, but also for cost optimization.
And then finally here, what alternatives does Expedient offer for those of us who want to exit Broadcom and VMware? And you started to touch on that for a moment with Nutanix, but let's kind of dive a little bit deeper on the Nutanix side there. what are we seeing for AHV at the edge, and kind of where's the real advantage there?
So one of the unique ones is licensing, right? From a licensing standpoint, we can do per VM for those really small sites. We have a couple clients with mission critical edge sites, high value, but very small number of workloads.
Like, and how many are in there?
Think 5 or less VMs
okay.
for some of these sites. It's even in that case, there's 1 or 2 that are kind of support VMs and 1 or 2 that are really critical that can never go down. And we have a really cost-effective way of licensing that. And more importantly, it is at the same service level as the VMware platform. Of course, it's different, operated slightly differently, but from a performance, availability, reliability standpoint, it's at the same level.
And I think that's kind of the key thing there, is that we're not necessarily tied into one specific area or another, right? We can give you that choice, help you figure out what is the right choice, and kind of walk you through, these are the options, here's how they would work. But I think the other services that go around them, though, is also a key thing there from an alternatives. Like, we can back it up the same way. We can DR, we can do operating system management, we can do our security tooling, but it's the same across either platform. So for us, it's down to client requirement and not necessarily, hey, this service works with this service and this service works with this other service, and you have to make a decision. It's much simpler than that.
Absolutely. With both platforms, our goal is to deliver 100% availability with a central point of management and a unified way of doing all operations. That's what our focus is, and we do that with both platforms.
I mean, how do we not end there? I want to thank everyone for joining. If you want to learn more, you can go to Expedient.com and go through our Edge platform documentation there and take a look at what we're offering. You could also scan the QR code that's right here on the screen to schedule your strategy session today and help you figure out how to best handle your Edge workloads, along with any of your other production, DR, and disaster recovery needs. And with that, I will thank all of you, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.